Welcome to the Friday morning study. We're looking at this whole theme of knowing and being and doing and putting all those things together, how godly principles strategically affect our everyday lives. And in that context, we've been looking at the whole realm of the spiritual life as one of the components. And we've discussed in the past the spiritual renewal card set. We talked about having a quiet time. How do we learn from Scripture and so forth? And pray, practicing God's presence. And now we're looking at the 9 marks of a disciple, and then just a little overview of a life of wisdom. So that's where we're going to be headed as we move forward in our time together. So in order to do that, then let's just take a look at some themes of where we've been thus far. So if you go to the website, first of all, you'll see that again. Under weekly studies in the top, here we are with the Friday morning study. And this is where we are. As you can see, we've now done 6 of the 9 marks of a disciple. And so just randomly choosing one, living in the presence of God. And again, I invite you to go back to these because they've been post-edited and we have a one-page summary of that material. And you can just go back and review that. And you can do that as well with the archive of the others as well. So if you go back further, you'll see we had practicing God's presence, we had quiet time, and things of this nature. So it becomes helpful then for you to understand how you could use this as a resource for your own encouragement. And also, if you want to go back and study one of those components, it's very valuable to do so. But here's where we've been then in this current study then. We've been talking about the 9 marks of a disciple. And we talked about that in terms of 9 Ps. And at first, a couple of them seemed forced, but after a while, some of the new words that came to me really made it more sensible, because instead of prophecy, which was a bit forced, it's really prospective, and that is the word I want. It's not forced at all. And so what we've observed thus far is that the first one is the key to all the others, because our key task in this world is to cultivate an eternal perspective in this temporal arena, to treasure things, to value things according to their true value, and to treat the temporal as such, the eternal as such, rather than postpone the idea of what I'll do in the future. So it's a mindset of living every day in the light of His presence and His power, His purpose for your life. And that perspective is amplified then by a growing grasp of our true identity in the heavenly places, which is what I call our position. So our mission in this world is to become in our practice more and more who we already are in our position in the heavenly places. The guiding through the presence of God, a third component of practicing His presence in all activities, remembering that when He tells us to abide in Him, to walk by the Spirit, to pray without ceasing, to rejoice always, these are ongoing practices. To love God and your neighbor, these are not just things you do part of the day. So this is how do we learn to practice His presence. We discussed that in a session. We talked about pursuit, choosing Jesus above all earthbound goods. And what we choose becomes the critical theme in our life. Our training in the spiritual disciplines, so that you practice, you habituate, you get better by doing, in the process of doing that. And then the power of the Holy Spirit becoming another component of what this means, to live in this pilgrim life in a soul-forming world. But now we're up to passion. And here I speak in terms of something that's very significant when we consider this idea of actually growing in both the love of God and also the fear of God. And I'm arguing really in this context that actually the love of God and the fear of God, let me make that a little bit smaller here for you just to make it a little bit more easy to read. But I'm arguing that the love of God and the fear of God reciprocally relate. Here's what I mean. You tell me what a man fears, I'll tell you what he loves. You tell me what a man loves, I'll tell you what he fears. Because you see, if a person is more afraid of a physical death by a particular disease, and that's what animates them, it seems, then more than actually being animated by the love of God. So they're more afraid of a certain death than they are of the living God Himself, and they're of the loss of that relationship. Let me put it another way. if you suppose that you want more than anything else to hear, "Well done, good and faithful servant, enter into the joy of your master," if that's your greatest aspiration, and can you say, "I want him more than anything else," and if you can't even say that honestly, you can say this, "Do you want to want him more than anything else?" And you can say that. And then he takes that holy intention and amplifies it. And so when we are now in the process of them pursuing him and having that passion to do that, then it's the love of God that animates us, energizes us to really do the things we're called to do. And at the same time, though, the love of God, we have the fear of the divine displeasure. We want to hear the well done. And so living with that, then, those two things go hand in hand. So let me unpack that a bit more for you as we try to tease this out for you. So we've talked a good deal about the fear of God in the past. And we've talked about this having a spectrum. And this spectrum really runs from actually having a sense of awe and a sense of humility at the very least, the sense of a mindset of a person who realizes that he does not really grasp the ways of the world. He cannot really order his steps because he needs to be understanding that he must be humble before God. He's radically dependent upon God. All things that come from him, through him, and to him, everything is gift and grace. What do you have that you didn't receive? Then why would you boast as if you didn't receive it? And then as we go, when he's a little bit less mediated, sometimes it's a sense of holy awe, and sometimes even more a sense of great dread when we sense, surely the Lord was here in this place and I didn't realize it. But then we even have examples of holy terror in the scriptures, where we see in Isaiah chapter 6, when God appears to Isaiah and he is overwhelmed and he says, "I'm undone, I'm disintegrated, I'm torn apart." And we see Ezekiel in that great vision with the cherubim and the glory of the appearance of the work of God himself above the firmament. And the awesome vision that he has. He falls on his face like a dead man, as did Isaiah. Daniel the same in chapter 10. Saul falls on his face like a dead man when he encounters the resurrected Christ in Acts chapter 9. John, again, like a dead man before him, because of the awe of the one that he's come to see. Even though he was the most intimate of the disciples, the one who leaned on Jesus' breast, nevertheless, there is this awesome sense of a holy awe. How does that work? How can they go together? Well, one way of looking at it is what I created as a spectrum of intimacy that really shows that there are various capacities that we have, relationships that we have with God. The first one being the most distant, in which he's so transcendent that we're just part of the created order. So that we are just a speck in the whole cosmic spectacle, you see. So that as we look at this, who is man? What is man that you behold him? So every one of these stars is beyond our grasp. And we live in an island universe. And this is another island universe with its vastness, its size, its capacity is so great we can hardly even begin to imagine. So when we look at this and wonder, who am I when I compare myself to these wonders and majesties, we do well to ask that question. So it raises this fundamental question then of, indeed, who am I? I'm just a part of the created order. But then yet the scriptures reveal something more. More than that, you're also, in a sense, seen as clay in the potter's hand. Now at least he's working with you personally. And though there's this image then of mineral that he's crafting and creating you, he's revealing something that's very clear to you. And it's this concept that I like to say, that God's in control and he has our best interests at heart. And so he shapes us as he will. And that's really a component of this relationship here. He shapes us as a potter would shape the clay. But then we're also, another metaphor in Scripture is that of more from the vegetable realm, so that we're like branches in the vine. And we don't create life. We were meant to receive and display his life. But then there's also the idea of sheep. So here we go from at least mineral to vegetable to animal. And here is a lowly creature in one way. It's charming and sweet, but it's not able to guide itself. It can't protect itself. It can't even feed itself properly. And so it's a kind of a humble image. But then the next level up, as you can clearly imagine, would be a human. But on this scale, would be the bottom, that is to say, one who is a servant, a bondslave. But then the next level up, we're also seen as being adopted children, and this becomes evident in the New Testament, as we can see that we've now been adopted by the living God into the family, into his family, so that we have a new past, a new present, and a new future. But then yet even more connected, no longer do I call you slaves, I call you friends, because I've made all things known to you. And while Abraham was called a friend of God, no one else is called that, but we are now called his friends. But yet there's even a more developed level of intimacy where we become the lover. He's the bridegroom and we are the bride. And he's preparing in his Father's house a place for us, so that when it's ready, he's going to come to receive us to himself, that where he is, there we may be also. So the lover of your souls. Now, these are an interesting realm of spectrum, a range of spectral aspects, because it goes from God as transcendent on the one hand to God as immanent and close on the other hand. So we see then that it's a both andness, and so we might prefer perhaps to be one of these more than another. We might prefer the lover or this, but reality tells us in Scripture that the others didn't go away. That, and in fact, that God is still transcendent and he's still immanent, so that who will not fear him, but also who will not love him. So this is why I say in the spectrum of intimacy, there is this transcendent, immanent dynamic that's quite mysterious. It transcends the ceiling of our comprehension, so that we can have a true sense then in which we love him for himself and see him for what he's called us to be and to do. And this concept of both the love of God and the fear of God then becomes very central in our understanding. So what you love then will define what you fear. So in doing that then, we look at this realm of how we can put the two together, and that then relates to what I call passion, because you see you're growing in those. And so your passion is you're animated, energized, empowered, and called to knowing him better, to love him more, and also to be astounded at his greatness and his awe and his majesty. The two, I claim, go hand in hand. And that's the one way in which we are to see it. It reminds me of something that I read many years ago, The Wind in the Willow. And this great story by Graham Greene is a story about these four animals, and it's a very clever series of tales about the badger and about the mole, about the rat, and about this frog and Mr. Toad and his wild ride and so forth. And they all actually, it's fascinating how the four characters actually have the same. They reveal four different aspects, the four basic temperaments, as one might say. It's brilliantly done in their interaction. But in one of the scenes in this children's story that's still, I think, a timeless classic, is when these two of those animals encountered what they called the piper at the gate of dawn. And it was something transcendent, something majestic, something powerful, that it produced a kind of a sense of a holy terror and a humility on the one hand, but yet there was also this love on the other, and it's intriguing. And so, rat, he found breath to whisper, this is the mole speaking to the rat, "Are you afraid?" as he beholds this. "Afraid?" murmured the rat, his eyes shining with unutterable love. "Afraid of him? Oh, never, never. And yet, oh mole, I am afraid." Then the two animals, crouching to the earth, bowed their heads and did worship. And I love that little scene because it illustrates something very profound, that it shows that there you can have both a sense of aspiration, of longing for him on the one hand, but also the more you come to know this This is the one who holds the all things together. And his power and authority is so vast that he transcends the grasp of our own comprehension. And so the more we see it, and we are privileged to see things that the ancient writers could not have even dreamed of, because all they could see was essentially the Milky Way galaxy, and they could see that, and they had better views of it because of less light pollution than we do. It was a marvel to behold. But even here, they did not know that it was consisting of billions of stars. All they could see was basically about 6,000, or less than that, stars to the visible eye, just a few thousand stars. They could never have dreamed or imagined that the scale and the scope was so great that it would be beyond our comprehension. And even though this globular cluster is so thick, it seems, yet those stars are so far away they'll never really, there's the likelihood of them interacting or hitting each other is so minimal, the vast scope and scale. So we are privileged to see things that the writers of the scriptures did not see, and so we can leverage that, I think, for our advantage. In my book, Conformed to His Image, which I'm happy to say to you, by the way, is now come out in a new form and a revised form. Let me see if I can get it for you here. It'd be probably this way. Here it is, Conformed to His Image. Just had it here. Here we go. And this has now been revised. We have a revised edition here. And as I think I've told you before, it has a study guide as well. And it has this this video study that you can, as a DVD, but it can be downloaded as well. So you can play that in a group. So it's become a discipleship curriculum, because the 15-minute videos, and there are 40 of them corresponding to the chapters, each of them then can be seen by a group without any preparation. They can see the video and then they can discuss it, because the study guide is based on the video. And so it becomes an instant discipleship tool, which I'm very pleased about. With that said, though, in this revised edition, I talk about this issue of wisdom in the idea of holistic spirituality, where we're talking about every aspect under the lordship of Christ. And I summarized some of the material by asking these various questions of the text then. And so some of these questions are, first of all, what is wisdom? And wisdom, I say, is the skill and the art of living life with every area under the dominion of God. It's the ability to use the best means at the best time to accomplish the best ends. And it's a key to a life of beauty, fulfillment, and purpose. And so when we think about wisdom, we know from the wisdom literature that there are so many facets of wisdom. We can see wisdom, its primary mean, as chokhmah is a word that means skill. It's skill in the art of living life. And it has to do with the fear of the Lord, which is the beginning and the foundation of wisdom. It relates to qualities we admire in great people: discernment, knowledge, prudence, understanding, discretion, instruction, insight, righteousness, equity, justice, learning, counsel, reproof, truth, goodness, beauty, nobility, humility, obedience, and rightness. These are all facets of the gem that is called the wisdom of God. And so we see that we want a life of wisdom in this world because there's so little, it's so lacking. The second question is, how do we pursue wisdom? So this is a summary of the discussion I had earlier in this chapter. And so I say it really comes from Him. It rests in the hands of God. Well, then what are the conditions for attaining it? It's only by cultivating the fear of the Lord. And that is what we're talking about here. But it also, remember, it's the flip side of the love of God. And I want to parenthetically comment on that because it's very critical for us to hear this. Obedience requires both fear and trust. So as we talk about that fear, this is not something we're drawn to. We typically ignore those texts and zoom in instead on these texts, the ones that talk about things we can more connect with, the trusting factor, His immanence, His goodness, His grace, that we can know Him and love Him in His presence. But here, this is equally clear in the Scriptures. And we do well then to actually embrace both, because it also has to do with his holiness, his transcendence, not just his immanence. Then we see then that we have humility and brokenness, contrition, to tremble at his words. And this is what I'm describing then as something we want to pursue, the fear of the Lord. So the fear of the Lord, as we've seen then, an attitude of awe and humility before him. It's an acknowledgement of our creaturehood, you see. And everything comes from him and through him and to him. But then why have so few people seem to develop this mindset of awe and humility? And I think it has to do with the temporal value system of this world. And it brings us back to what we were talking about earlier, when we were talking about these various capacities and components, where it really comes out of cultivating this eternal perspective. Without that, you really won't be able to move in the direction that God wishes for you to have. So it's very important for us to see then that this temporal value system, it's because we want to treasure what's seen, yet the scriptures tell us what is not seen, so we have to pursue the unseen. And so it's countercultural, counterintuitive. And yet we take what God's revealed, and that it's the love of Christ in us that's manifested the love of the Father, that we take that and we go from there. So what can therefore enable us to reject a temporal value system and choose the eternal value system? And I think that this is cultivated by faith. And by faith, I mean I'm believing in God in spite of appearances and circumstances to the contrary. So as I see it, then biblical faith involves then trusting in him. And when he tells us, for example, that I am seated with him in the heavenly places, that I'm dead to sin, alive to God, I don't feel that way. He didn't ask me to feel that way. He said, is it true? Do you reckon it as so? In spite of your feelings and in spite of your experiences to the contrary, nevertheless, God has said it, and you need to recalibrate your thinking. And the more you do that, the more you live in the context of what is really true, because this has been revealed by the Maker of all things. So believing in God in spite of appearances and to the contrary. But then how do we grow in this faith then, is the seventh question. And it's directly proportional, our trust ability, to our knowledge of God. So you're not going to be able to really to trust him, to grow in faith, until you know him. So how do you grow in your knowledge of God? And that relates to the fact that God is a person. And that's why I say, think about your closest relationships. First of all, both people need to be willing to get to know each other. And if God did not wish us to know him, we would never even imagine. We would only know about his eternal power and divine nature. That would be it. But also, they need to gain a knowledge, not just about each other, but knowledge of each other, not just about each other. This is the difference. Knowledge of each other. And so that's a personal, experiential, relational knowledge, you see. So this is more than an acquaintance. This is a connection, a growing in love. And then openness and acceptance. So you need to be willing to know each other. You need to gain a knowledge of each other, not just learn things about each other. And then you have to be open and acceptance, forgiveness necessary for the conditions. There's also got to be time spent in communication. And that's where the Word of God and prayer fit in so beautifully to this, because it really helps us and amplifies that. And it's developed in action, because then we respond, you see, to God. And to love him is to want to respond to his program and his purposes for our lives. So this is the way I view this, and we've talked about this on multiple occasions when I've talked about this whole idea that really there's a reciprocal relationship when we look at this between the key, because the key to glorifying the Father is to bear fruit, the key to bearing fruit is to abide, the key to abiding is obedience. If you love me, you're going to keep my commandments. And obedience flows out of trust, which flows out of love, which flows out of knowing. And this knowledge is personal, not distant, not remote, but a very real personal connection that we are called to have. And that's why on the spiritual renewal cards, I talk about this theme of these four life-changing prayers. And those four prayers that I would urge and encourage you to memorize, because they can be transformative, invite us to know him in a personal, experiential, relational way, and not merely something at a distance. And so as we come to know him then, personally, then knowing that to know him is to love him, To love him then is to be willing to trust him, even when he calls us to do things that don't make full sense. To trust him is expressed in obedience. So your actual expression is what you choose and what you do. So you are defined by the choices that you make, not merely about your intentions. So when you go through the acts of obedience then, to obey him is actually to abide in him, to draw your vitality from him and not from yourself. And as you abide in him, naturally, you're going to bear fruit. And as you bear fruit, you so glorify the Father. So you see this beautiful reciprocal relationship that we enjoy in that relationship with the living God. And so this is why I'm saying it's developed in action. So if I want to enhance my sense of the fear of God, what can I do that can help me along that line? That there are things that we can do that can amplify that. One of the things that I provided, and we've talked about before, is one resource, my Handbook to Prayer, because this is a resource that invites you to pray Scripture back to God. And here's how I recommend you use it for this particular purpose. Look at the prayers of adoration, and you'll see that it's theocentric, not anthropocentric. It's not egocentric. It's about him and about recalibrating our lives. But also I'd invite you to look at the prayers of thanksgiving. We'll give thanks to the Lord and call on his name. And so if you just went through these prayers of adoration and the prayers as well of thanksgiving, you would have a nice collection, you see, of things that we can use to really grasp more and more who he is in our lives. And so again, thanksgiving and then adoration. To whom will you compare me? Who is my equal, says the Holy One. Lift your eyes to the heavens. See who has created them, who brings out the starry host by number. And we see that starry host, but they couldn't see this. What they could see, though, was this, and it's an astonishment that they could see this glory of the living God, and there are things that he reveals. Bring out the starry host by number, and he tells us then that we see who created them. He calls them each by name. Not one of them is missing. The everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, does not grow tired or weary. No one can fathom his understanding. So as we move through these things, we're going to see texts that will tell us about the one who made us for himself. And when we can, again, texts of this nature here, I know that you can do all things, no purpose of yours can be thwarted. So this is a very critical thing. So this is one way in which we can, in fact, enhance our apprehension of the love of God and the fear of God, both by putting the two together. And this, to me, is a wonderful way. We see the sun as the radiance of God's glory, an exact representation of his nature. So there's a sense of awe and power and majesty that he has for us, you see. And so we look at these texts of Scripture. Who will not fear him becomes a major motif in this. I think about Psalm 103, one of my favorite psalms, because it beautifully portrays the intimate relationship we can have with the living God. When he says, bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless his holy name. And he speaks about his benefits and so forth. And it's a wonderful, beautiful meditation on God's greatness, but also his love for us. But he goes on to say, as high as the heavens are above the earth, so as great is his loving kindness toward those who fear him. So we see the love of God is very beautifully evident in this psalm. As far as the east is from the west, so far he's removed our transgressions. Just as the Father has compassion on his children, he has compassion. But notice this, though. In verse 11, you'll see the first of three statements, those who fear him. And that's not to be overlooked. So great is his loving kindness toward those who fear him. Then we go to verse 13. So the Lord has compassion on those who fear him. And then we go again and we see verse 17. The loving kindness of the Lord is from everlasting to everlasting on those who fear him. 3 times we're told about that. And his righteousness. So fear is not inimical to love at all, but they actually go perfectly hand in hand and invite us to really obey him, just as the heavenly host and the angels, how they obey him. All works of his obey him. So we are called to do the same. So this idea of fear and love actually go together in that particular psalm. So it's a rich psalm and worthy of our discussion as well. It's something that can be powerful for us to consider as we take all those threads and put them together. So there are certain questions that we have created and I've crafted for this purpose here. And one of those questions has, before I go to those questions, I did want to bring up one other thing. And it's this concept of the journey of life. I did a series on my website on this whole idea, and I'd like you to consider taking a look at it. Go to Weekly Studies, this time go to Sunday morning instead of Friday morning. And what you'll see is this wisdom series. And a few times before, let me see if I can find it here, I did something, here it is, on the voyage of life. And so what I did here was a 10-part series on Thomas Cole's magisterial series of paintings called The Voyage of Life. And the reason why I did that is because of this. When I went and saw these paintings at the National Gallery of Art, I took these photos because these are things that he commented about the various stages of life. And so his own comments then were that of the idea of childhood. And what does he say? A stream is seen issuing from a deep cavern in the side of a craggy and precipitous mountain whose summit is hidden in clouds. And he describes each of these, and it's like this description. And what we see here as I unpack them is this. We see childhood then. And it's this voyage of life, we're all on it. And the phrase that I use is, age conspires with God to take away our temporal hope. It's designed to draw us to an apprehension of the glory of God. And so we see here is an angel that's holding the rudder, and it's on this little boat, this little child, and this is, he's delighting in the beauty that is in which he finds himself embedded. But he doesn't see the angel. And then in our youth, and then he still doesn't see the angel who is over here, but rather the angel is then he's looking ahead over here instead, and so he sees this as being something that he's looking for. So he's pointing up in this direction, you see. So what is he pointing to? And this aspiration, his youthful fantasy about this great life that he might live in, these wonders. What he fails to grasp, though, is he does not see that this actual goes there, and it actually, the stream doesn't go straight as he would hope, but rather it turns to the right and leads to a precipitous place. That's important for us to see, because effectively then what we're seeing is the movement away to now he's at that precipitous point, and that in his manhood he cries out to God, and because he now he can see off in the distance that ocean which is that of death, and he sees the end in front of him, and the beauty is now gone. And so he cries to God, and he doesn't see the angels behind him, the other angels there that are seen. And then in this interesting last painting by Thomas Cole of The Voyage of Life, for the first time as an old man he sees the angel, but you'll see his boat has now completely fallen apart effectively. It's now, it's become, the rudder's gone, the clock, the hourglass is gone. It's all gone. Now he sees the angel. What is the angel doing? The angel is pointing beyond now to this revelation, and others are in the train as well. You can see here and here and here. And so we have this extraordinary imagery then of how we are being carried to the other side. And I call your attention to this because, as I say, we do well to remember how brief, how ephemeral, how short our lives are. Teach us to number our days that we may present to you a heart of wisdom. Well, the way you want to be wise then is to realize that they live in the precious present and only have 2 days in your calendar, today, which is all you've got, and that day, the day of Christ, and to live each day in light of that day, and that's a life well lived. So in light of all these things then, I ask these basic questions for us to reflect on together. Let me find them for you here. Why does obedience require both fear and trust? And I'm arguing there that you need to wrestle through this. And when the Friday morning group, we typically have the table leaders, but it's good for you to think about this individually or collectively. It requires both, because it's not just what you want, but there is also the downside of the loss of what potential there could be. And there should be a holy dread of not living well. There should be this intention of using the brief window of time we have in the soul-forming world to really be his people for this time. And then the second, Do you relate to God more as transcendent, immanent, or both? And if you're like most people, it'll be more as immanent rather than transcendent. But my desire would be for you to move more in the both-andedness that we described before, that we're all of these. And so there's a sense in which he is transcendent, but he's also immanent. So we live in that sense of his holy and awesome presence. And that can be a healthy thing for us to do. And then finally, how does Psalm 103 speak to both fear and love? And we looked at those three texts in which you saw to those who fear him, but you also saw his covenantal love. God, the God of Scripture, is the only one who keeps and maintains covenant. Remember that a covenant is really a commitment to another's best interests, whereas a contract is to protect yourself from another person. God is the covenant maker. And although Israel turned out to be his, as it were, unfaithful, and they played the harlot and went after other gods and goddesses. In spite of that, God says, I will still, even though you will face the consequences and you'll be scattered around the earth, I will gather you together and you will be my people and I will show fidelity to you. Look at the book of Hosea, for example, that though you failed, I will receive you back. And so it's a beautiful picture then of the covenant love of God and the holiness of God as well. So it's a way of seeing, it's a way of understanding, it's a way of apprehension. So that's my desire for you then, is that you be a person who really manifests the love of God in your sphere of influence, that you become an agent of change, of transformation, that you become a person then who really grows in this holy obedience that we've described before, of the fear and the trust, where we live both ways and understand that the two do affect one another, because what you love will define what you fear will define what you love.